What is going on, guys? Today we are going to be installing a CES Cutring cylinder head gasket and ARP cylinder head bolts onto an M52, M50, S52, basically any 36 straight 6, the 24 valve motors. So there's a couple things I would like to talk about before we get into the install. Number one is if you guys are going to be boosting on the cylinder head gasket and running a full factory bottom end, you are probably going to want to run a copper spacer along with it. CES sells copper spacers to go with it. Now, before you lay the cylinder head gasket onto the block, for one, make sure the block is prepped. I will leave a link in the description on how to properly clean your block, get it ready for the new head gasket. Once the block is ready, you guys are going to take that new copper spacer, and CES recommends that you copper spray it on both sides. I think you have to let it dry for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then you're going to lay the copper spacer on the block first, and then the cylinder head gasket's going to go on. The CES Cutring head gasket's going to go on after. So it's going to be block, spacer, head gasket, cylinder head. Now this bottom end I did build, and I'm not going to be running a copper spacer simply because it is a low compression motor. It has low compression pistons in it. I do not need a compression drop from a copper spacer, so we're not going to be running one. But that's basically it. If you guys are going to be running a copper spacer, just spray it down, throw it on, and then the rest of the install procedure is basically the same. Now, the second thing I want to talk about real quick is the cylinder head. Make sure your cylinder head is smooth, clean, and machined for that new head gasket to seal properly. The CES Cutring head gasket has little rings that will physically cut into the cylinder head to provide a better seal, yes, but you do still need to resurface it simply because you have coolant jackets, you have oil return jackets, all that other stuff needs to seal aside from just the combustion chambers itself. So there is no guarantee that all of the coolant jackets and all of the oil jackets are going to seal properly if you don't machine your head. So if you're going to be doing this head gasket install, or any head gasket install, make sure to get your cylinder head machine cut, otherwise you might end up with an oil leak or a coolant leak right after you replace your cylinder head gasket, which is bad. Another thing I want to hit on is the camshafts. So the way ARP has the stud and nut combo, those nuts are a huge pain in the ass to get on the cylinder head studs with the camshafts in the way. You have to like feed it between the cam and the lifter and the tray, and it doesn't go on straight. It goes on like an angle, and then it gets in that little thing, and you gotta get like magnets and straighten it out. I had to do it with my M50 B25 when we rebuilt it. It's a pain in the ass. I'm going to tell you guys straight up, it is going to be much easier to install the cylinder head bolts properly with the cams completely off. I will leave a link in the description for you guys for removing and installing cams, and then that won't be an issue. If you are going to leave your cams on, just know, I'm telling you guys are going to suffer. So have fun. Tools we will be using: a 1/2 inch click style torque wrench for the cylinder head bolts. I have a 1/2 inch to 3/8 adapter, a short little 3/8 extension, and this guy is going to be the socket we're going to use to torque the ARP nuts on there, but keep in mind that it is not a standard 6-point socket because the nuts are not standard 6-point nuts. Your best bet for finding one of these is basically going to be get the ARP nut set and take one of the nuts into a tool store with you or into like an AutoZone and find a socket like this that fits it properly. This one is a 12 millimeter, if you guys are wondering. A 3/8 torque wrench. You're not supposed to torque the studs, but I did to 40 inch-pounds. It's such a tiny torque, I don't really think it matters. So I used it for that, and also the 2 torque bits that connect the cylinder head to the timing cover also need to be torqued. A 3/8 to 1/4 inch adapter, a 1/4 inch extension, and an E8 torque socket. Those are again for the cylinder head to timing cover studs, the little bolts that go in there. And the Allen hole on the ARP studs are 4 millimeters. Alright, so now we are going to install the cylinder head gasket, but before we do that, I went ahead and made sure that all of my bolt holes are clean. I ran a stud all the way in and all the way out. Everything felt good. Make sure your cylinder head bolt wells are clean, because if it's not, it's going to have a harder time getting that proper clamping force. So make sure those are clean. I'm also going to go rub down the deck of the cylinder block one more time just to make sure that there are no more oils or any of that nasty stuff on there. Yeah, so these cut ring gaskets have a smooth side and a side with 3 little ridges. When you install the cut rings, make sure the ridges are face up. So now we're going to lay the gasket. Let's get that lined up on the dowel pin. So again, for you guys who would be running copper spacers, the copper spacer would be underneath this gasket. Now we're going to lay the gasket nice and flat, and the cut ring needs to go with the groove facing straight up. Just like that. Ooh, cut ring, baby. Make sure all of the cut rings are sitting flush with each other, all nice and even. Once all of the cut rings are installed, it is time to install the cylinder head. But again, just like the block, you want to make sure that the surface is perfectly smooth and perfectly clean. Hit it with some brake cleaner or microfiber just to make sure that it's extra clean, because you don't want any junk getting on here like dirt or rocks or any of that stuff. Another thing we're going to need to do is to feed the timing chain and the timing guide through the hole in the cylinder head as we lower the head on. So it's going to be a little bit of a trick. This is definitely not a one-person job. You're going to need 2 or 3 people to get this done properly, because 1, the cylinder head is heavy, and 2, you kind of have to maneuver it around and maneuver it through. It can be kind of tricky. So you want to take one of these cylinder head studs, and they have fastener assembly lubricant. So you should be using this on all the studs and all the nuts. So we're just going to take a little bit there, and then just rub it in, and then thread that bad boy in. So we used that stud and that stud as kind of like guide studs. Works like a champ. Alright, so the cylinder head is aligned. It dropped nicely onto the dowel pins. Now we're going to take the remainder of the studs and thread them in their holes, one by one, all the way down the line. And remember to use the fastener assembly lubricant. Just put a little bit on each side of the threads. Another thing to note is the flat side goes into the block. So you'll notice it has like a little bit of a bubble on the bottom. That one goes into the block. The one with the Allen key up top goes sticking up, if that makes sense. So we're going to take a little bit of that lubricant, squeeze it onto the threads there, wipe it on. And thread it in finger tight. So as far as tightening these studs go, they say you're supposed to do it just finger tight, but I like to torque them down to 40 inch-pounds. That's such a low torque setting that it just sort of evens the playing field among all of the studs. Not to mention, you could probably get 40 inch-pounds with your finger if you really wanted to. It's not super tight. Because we're not tightening the cylinder head down, there's really no torque sequence, so I'm just going to do them one by one until all of them are torqued at 40. Just a little light. Next up, the ARP head bolts has a dandy little set of cylinder head bolt washers we're going to be installing. And each stud gets one. This part is significantly easier with the cams off. Just saying. Those of you guys who are doing this right now with your cams on, I don't feel bad for you at all. Now moving on to the pack of nuts. Now what I like to do with each nut is take them out, and then we'll take some of our assembly lube and just squeeze it right into the nut. Like that, and then thread that on. Alright, now once you have all 14 studs, washers, and then nuts on, then we can begin the torque sequence. So if you guys will take a note of the insulation, basically paper that they give you, this is the torque sequence that you're going to be tightening these nuts in. in a nutshell. So it says right here, tighten nuts 1 through 14 to 25. So that's sequence 1, 1 through 14 at 50, and then 1 through 14 at 75. So we're going to go down and go 1. The first round is going to be at 25 foot-pounds, so 25, 25, 25, 25, all the way through all 14 of them. And then the second pass is going to be 50, so 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, all the way across. And then the last one is going to be 75, 75, 75, 75, all the way across. So 3 passes, first pass 25, second pass 50, third pass 75 foot-pounds. I'm going to be using just a standard 1/2-inch torque wrench for this. For those of you guys who are going to be running the copper spacer, I think there is a mildly different sequence for you guys. Because you guys are running the copper spacer, I think it's up to 85 instead of 75, and I think you have to do like this weird 24-hour thing. If you guys are running the copper spacer and the Cutring head gasket combo, I would look into the instructions for the install. I think they have their own, so they might be slightly different from just the standard ARP install kit. But now we're basically going to torque them in this sequence all the way around. Alright, so torque sequence number 1 is going to be at 25 foot-pounds. So starting at number 1 is right there. Two. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Alright, that is pass number 1. Pass number 2 is going to be at 50 foot-pounds. So starting over, cylinder 1. There's 1. 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Final pass is going to be at 75. 71, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, 1 through 14, 75. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, last one. 14. There it is. Now the last thing we're going to have to do is install these little guys. So these go through the cylinder head into the timing cover right there. So the shorter of the two goes in that hole, and the longer of the two goes out back right here. Boom. And these guys are E8 torque spits. So we're just going to run them down. And I believe the torque spec for these are 89, but if they're not, I'll probably get roasted by someone in the comments. It's 192, bro. I just hate to snap one of those things. The cylinder head is now torqued. Now from here, you would basically reinstall the cams. I will leave a video link in the description for you guys on how to properly set up the bottom end so you can put the cams in so you're not interfering with the valves or the pistons in any of the ways. Because when installing cams, again, you do have to rotate it. If you took them off, you kind of know the drill. Alright, that is it. Our Cutring cylinder head gasket and ARP head studs are installed. Thank you guys so much for watching. Keep it fresh, and I will see you guys later.
We are dreaming in the dark. We are nothing more than dust.